These strategies helped my students get a band 8, so there's no reason why you can't make it. From 6.5 to 8 in 10 days. From 6 to 8 in 6 days. From 6.5 to 8 in 3 days. And a band 8 in just one attempt in 10 days. So, what did he do to achieve a band 8 in a short period of time? What were their weaknesses that you might also have, but you just don't know because no one really tells you? I would love to share with you the 6 weaknesses that these students had in common that stopped them from reaching their full potential. And I would love to share with you as well the strategies that I used to address those weaknesses practically. And those strategies helped them achieve a band 8. So these are the evaluation pages or the assessment pages I had for these 4 students when I was coaching them. I collected other weaknesses, so you can also evaluate your own weaknesses that stopped you from reaching your full potential. Knowing your weaknesses is the first step. My name is Julius, and welcome to ieltsDragon. I've been helping many students pass their IELTS speaking test. If you're interested in my one-on-one coaching program, just send me an email. Or if you need reviewers for the latest topics in the IELTS speaking test, just send me an email. I will send you sample reviewers and see for yourself if you need the full version of my reviewers. My reviewers helped many students pass their IELTS speaking test. So if you're interested, send an email today. First, sounding too rehearsed, too prepared, or sounding robotic. If you read a lot of sample answers and whereas you memorized all of those sample answers, you'll end up speaking so unnaturally. Or if you don't add rhythm when you speak, like adding the rising and falling intonation, you'll sound monotonous, robotic, uninteresting, or boring. Remember this. Nobody enjoys talking to someone who sounds monotonous. Worse, nobody enjoys talking to someone who doesn't show facial expressions or emotions. I want you to remember that the IELTS speaking test is a natural conversation test. Therefore, avoid sounding robotic. You have to sound more conversational. Imagine that you're simply talking to your closest friend. You have to treat the IELTS speaking test that way. Enjoy as if you're just talking to a closest friend of yours. That is the way to build a good connection with your examiner. Next, lack of confidence. This happens when you aren't prepared for the given topic, and as a result, you panic, you hesitate in speaking, and you repeat yourself a lot. It is your responsibility to prepare a lot of ideas for a lot of topics in the IELTS speaking test. So before you take the actual IELTS speaking test, prepare ideas for a lot of topics, at least basic to intermediate ideas, so that you have something to share with your examiner when you are asked a certain thing. Or if you're an advanced learner, then use your creative thinking skills. Make things up. That's fine. Anyway, the IELTS speaking test is not a quiz bee that you need to give a correct answer. No, there's no such a thing as that. Let me congratulate my one-on-one coaching program student for passing the IELTS speaking test in just one attempt. Nico Floralde, band 7.5. Congratulations, Nico. And if you're interested in my one-on-one coaching program, send an email today. The next weakness that my student had, which I really believe you also have, is that simply saying whatever things you can think of at the moment. Literally saying anything. You don't spend time absorbing or getting the point of the question. When you hear the question, you open your mouth and just say whatever pops into your head. The problem with this is that you can't focus on giving a clear or concise answer to your examiner. In other words, your answer is incoherent, which means you'll lose points in the criterion fluency and coherence. The best solution to this is to give one idea at a time. And if you can think of another idea after giving that first idea, then that's the time that you can add that idea. For example, let's say the question in part 3 is, what are the advantages of living in the city? Now here, some students that I met answered this way. Observe how they answered. Well, the advantages of living in the city are people can get a job easily, people can avail better facilities, and they can conveniently access public transportation. City living is convenient. That's why I live in the city. Although I want to live in the countryside because it's more peaceful and it is not polluted, city living is giving me more opportunities. Not only that, the city is more comfortable as it provides me with the things that I really need and want. At the moment, I cannot see myself living in the countryside yet because it is inconvenient. Look at that. Just saying whatever things they can think of. The ideas are all over the place. That is painful to listen to. There is no organization. Now, here, instead of enumerating all the advantages, focus on each advantage at a time and give a bit of explanation so that you can make your answer more insightful and coherent, just like this one. Obviously, the advantages of city living are first, people can get a job easily since businesses are centered in the city. More businesses means more job opportunities. Another advantage is that people have easy access to different establishments or facilities as they are conveniently available. And more importantly, people need not buy a car since they have a lot of choices in terms of public transportation. Can you see the difference? One idea at a time. It's organized, easy to follow, or easy to understand. The way to achieve that is to focus on understanding the point of the question. The next weakness is very common among students, and it's about talking so much about personal experiences in part 3. Now, part 3 is not specifically about you, but it's general, people in general, or things in general. So avoid giving so many personal experiences as your examples in answering part 3 questions. You have to use third person point of view. So, third person point of view includes he, she, and they. Well, specifically they, because most of the time you will talk about people in general. So avoid using I, we, or you, right? You is second person point of view. So we have to avoid using those things, of course, unless we are asked by our examiner. But again, use the third person perspective. Now, let me give you an example. Let's say the question in part 3 is what kinds of people are popular at work? Now, some students that I met usually talked about their situation. For example, they answered like this in our company or in our hospital, blah, blah, blah. So, why are you talking about your own situation or your own experience when the question is not about you? So don't do that. The best way to answer that question is, of course, to use the third person perspective. For example, I can answer like this. I believe those workers who are talented or creative, or those who perform really well, are mostly famous at work. See that? I didn't say in our company or in my hospital. I didn't say that. Because again, part three is not about my personal experience or my situation, it's general. Now, bear this in mind. This is very important. If you keep on talking about yourself, your own experience, then you cannot reach your full potential. Talking about our personal experience is so easy. But if you talk about something using the third person point of view, that is more challenging. And when you do that, of course, you are actually expressing yourself more. You are stepping out of your comfort zone to communicate your thoughts in a more advanced way. And the examiner really likes that because he will be able to understand more about your English communication skills. It's never easy to talk about something in third person than talking about our own personal experience. Now, when you give an example, I want you to use a third person point of view. Um, for example, software engineers at Apple company or Google company are mostly famous at work simply because they are the ones who innovate new programs that would improve the performance of their products. See that? I didn't talk about my personal experience, but I use the third person perspective. That is how you give an example. So don't talk about your own situation or your own personal experience. Bear that in mind because that's very important. Now, listen to this. This is one of the most common problems, not just with the four students of mine who get a band 8, but the majority of my students. And that is not structuring the story or their story in part two, unfortunately. Now, if you don't structure your story, you will simply beat around the bush. You will just keep on talking and talking until you don't know what to say next. In other words, your story doesn't have any direction. And as a result, your examiner will not be able to understand the entirety of your story. Now, remember this. All stories out there have a structure. May they be a novel, a short story, or a movie. There is always a structure. Because if there isn't, of course, we won't be able to understand the story or the movie that we are watching. So bear in mind to structure your story. You don't want to beat around the bush and you don't want to just keep on talking until you don't know what to say next. So be careful when it comes to telling a story, strategize it by structuring. The next issue is grammar. Grammar, grammar, grammar. Well, not all of us enjoy learning about grammar because it's difficult and it's boring. Let's admit that. However, we need to spend time learning about grammar because this is one of the best ways for us to communicate more effectively. When we know the grammar rules, especially the basic to intermediate ones, we will be able to confidently communicate our thoughts. Now, this is what I have been noticing with my students. Common grammar issues include the subject verb agreement, verb tenses, or the correct use of the verb, and the lack of ideas in terms of advanced grammar. Now, here, this is the advice that I usually give to all of my students. Spend time learning about basic grammar, intermediate, and then when they're comfortable, move on to learning advanced grammar. Because once you know how to compose sentences correctly, you'll become more confident. Speaking English becomes so natural. All right, so we need to strategize our answers in the IELTS speaking test because one of the criteria is grammar range and accuracy. So we have to make sure that we learn some advanced grammar, such as conditionals, inversion, and reported speech. Well, especially reported speech, because this is helpful in terms of developing our story in part two. Now, I already created a video about reported speech, so make sure to watch that video because that video can really help you strategize your answer in part two. As we know, we need to make sure to use some advanced grammar. So that video will teach you how to use reported speech in your story. So watch the video that appears on your screen right now because that can really change your way of telling a story. These strategies helped my students get a band 8, so there's no reason why you can't make it.